Welcome back to the conversation. I'm David Schuster. By now, most of you have already heard about Ivermectin. It's that horse deworming drug that a lot of personalities on Fox News have been pushing to people in terms of treatment of COVID-19. But there are some problems with this, never mind that it's for horses. And there's also a story in all this that seems to have been missed. So here to talk about all of this is Angelo Carusone. He's the president and CEO of Media Matters. Angelo, before we get to the YouTube issue and all this, I want to ask you, what's been your reaction to seeing Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham, and the rest pushing ivermectin?
I mean, it basically is like, it's exactly what I would have expected, which is that they'll do absolutely anything to convince their audiences that COVID is not that big of a deal, that there's some kind of grand conspiracy to exploit COVID in order for liberals and the media and Democrats to exert control over them, and that therefore they should, ignore the public health responses and instead turn to all these fads or these cures or nothing at all. And so I think it's part of the course. I'm pretty confident that Tucker Carlson is not shooting himself full of ivermectin, and neither is Laura Ingraham, and that they're very comfortable being vaccinated. And so it's expected. I mean, they were canceling birthday parties and events at the same time that they were telling people to book cruises last year, right at the beginning of the pandemic start. And this is basically just, to me, a continuation of the trend that they've been doing the whole way.
The impact of Fox News is that apparently at some livestock feed stores, there's been a run on ivermectin because that's in this sort of this horse dewormer, although the amount of ivermectin in that is extremely concentrated and far more dangerous than, say, if you had ivermectin given to you in a dosage you would get from a doctor, even though most doctors would tell you it just doesn't do anything. But in any case, Angelo, you pointed out Media Matters has found that, YouTube still has a lot of videos about ivermectin up there. How come?
That's the question. I mean, I think that, to me, one of the biggest flashpoints is it wasn't that long ago that they were patting themselves on the back because they took down a video from Ron Johnson that was promoting the use of the drug or sort of giving some misinformation about it. They were using that as an example of how they consistently enforce their policies and as a illustration of how effective they've been. But in reality, if you just do a really basic search and then you start to dig in a little bit, what you'll find is tons of videos that not just promote ivermectin as a cure and a way to treat COVID, but to actually take it prophylactically, to get ahead of it because it can actually make you immune to COVID. And then the third thing is a whole range of videos about how ivermectin is safer to use than, say, the common shampoos that you would use if you had, say, head lice, for instance, that it's such a common thing. And so it's an avalanche of misinformation. YouTube has not enforced any of the rules against these videos, in large part because they're pretty well-established networks. And when you take them down, they get critiqued. And they also lose views and engagement. And they're having a big battle with TikTok right now, and they don't want to lose any more minutes spent on YouTube. That's the dirty secret.
How has YouTube responded to the criticism?
The one thing about YouTube in comparison to others is that they're the worst. At least Facebook will performatively start to engage with some of the content that they say is against their own rules. They may enforce it against a fraction, even a substantial fraction of the videos that researchers or third parties bring to their attention. And in some cases, they've been pretty good about being proactive about it. YouTube, on the other hand, basically ignores it. They may take down one. So if you give them 15 or 20 videos that have had several 100,000, in some cases millions of views, they may remove one that is disconnected from, say, an account that has a really large subscription base. So maybe it was a video that got randomly posted from one of those burner accounts that then gets, who cares if it gets taken down, right? Because they're not losing subscribers or anything and people clone them. So that's what they'll do. They took down one video that was disconnected from a larger account, but for the most part, they've left up all the others. And that, I think, is, these videos some of them are pretty compelling in the sense that they masquerade as medical experts or, people that have public health backgrounds, when in fact, they're not actually doctors at all. But they may have a PhD in literature, but they use that doctor moniker, or they may be chiropractors, but they'll sort of, they'll present it as if they're giving scientific research. So they're giving it the color and credibility of, someone in the medical field actually promoting the use of this drug.
I wonder if there's any room for nuance with YouTube, and here's why. I was talking to a pulmonologist the other day about ivermectin, and he said, look, if ivermectin is prescribed in the normal medical fashion, in other words, by a doctor, it doesn't do anything for you in terms of COVID, treatment COVID or protecting, but it doesn't do any harm. The harm comes if you're taking it in the horse paste or in the dosages, the concentrated dosages you would get for livestock. So is it possible for YouTube to draw that distinction and say, okay, if somebody wants to put a video up about a drug that is really not doing anything, so be it. It's where they start prescribing or recommending people take a livestock feed. That's where we should draw the line.
Yeah, I think that'd be totally fair. I think if we were going to criticize YouTube for allowing anyone to really talk about the drug, especially how it's prescribed, I think that would be kind of irrational of us, right? And unfairly reactionary. But if you're out there, one, not drawing a distinction at all, and not even flagging that there's a difference, which is an important thing for most people to know. If you're watching a YouTube explainer about the use of ivermectin in COVID, and you never once mentioned that the ivermectin you see at your local shelf is not the ivermectin that a doctor would give, say, somebody that was being treated for correctly, that's a pretty big piece of information that you'd want to know, especially since they're spelled the same. There's no special way to know the difference. The other thing is a lot of this content will also give people their own personal way of taking these off-the-shelf drugs for farm animals and how you can dose yourself to get, say, a human-sized dose of it for COVID treatment. And that's where it actually starts to get much more explicit and dangerous, right? Because you're telling people how to use something that is clearly not for that. And I think most of the content is the latter. It's not somebody just talking about the drug generically. I think that would be okay.
I've always liked to tell friends and sort of joke around, but there's an element of seriousness to it that with Media Matters, you guys watch Fox News, so the rest of us don't have to. Is there something to be said about simply saying, okay, let YouTube put whatever they want and leave it to organizations like yours or to medical science organizations to do the critiques of these videos and not go down the road of trying to decide what is misinformation and what is not?
Yes, I think there's definitely something to that. And by and large, that would be an acceptable thing. I think the important thing to consider here is when the platforms start to draw and enforce these actions. To me, the bigger question becomes, okay, you've now set a policy. How are you enforcing it? And we just found out this week, right, that Facebook has a secret list and for years was using internally of influencers that they considered to be above or accepted from enforcing any of their terms of service against. Most of those influencers are right-wingers, right? They don't give the same benefit to left-leaning influencers or others, right? It was predominantly right-wing influencers. So when you set a policy and then you don't start to enforce that policy consistency, I think that's where, say, a research organization like Media Matters should start to ring the bell, because that's an alarm bell. What it means is that, one, that means there's probably almost always is there larger discrepancy in their enforcement. And it also shows that they're spinning some BS, right? Some PR speak. And to me, the part that elicited this research followed them going out there and taking down one ivermectin video and saying, here's our bright line. When in fact, give us all the credit, we're doing our part, now leave us alone. And in fact, what it turned out to be the case was PR relations more than, say, an actual consistent policy. And that matters to me. I'd rather, even if they don't take it down, there's all kinds of things that you can do in terms of how the algorithm weights it, how you're recommending the videos. That's really worries me, is when they start to recommend that kind of content to individuals that may be susceptible to it. So I'm sensitive to the free speech questions and also like the market. I think it's okay to have these fights, but I also think it's important for us to hold individuals and these platforms to account when they want credit for something that they're not actually doing. And then separately, to really make it clear that I think the bigger threat about these videos being on the platform isn't just that they're there, it's that the entire power of YouTube's recommendation engine is actually helping connect that specific content with people really susceptible to it.
Well, to me, and that's a great point, because never mind the hypocrisy at YouTube and Facebook over their different sort of ways of their different standards. But a lot of people don't realize that there are algorithms that these organizations have in terms of what videos they push, which videos they promote. Is it your sense that the algorithms are shifting now towards favoring conservative videos and criticizing or demonetizing or withdrawing democratic videos? And what's the reason that a Facebook or YouTube would go in that direction?
It's interesting. We started to see this trend. There's always been a sense of it, but we started to find evidence of this trend leading up to the election. In fact, in the months before election day, we did an analysis of the top 100 videos just about voting on YouTube. And not only were the majority of those videos from right-leaning platforms, even though left-leaning videos were producing content, they just weren't getting the same reach and engagement. There was about half of the right-leaning videos contained explicit misinformation about voting that violated YouTube's terms of service. And that alone should mean that it shouldn't be in the top 100 or top 10. And so I think it really gets back to what I was referencing earlier, which is, are you enforcing these policies consistency against left and right? And ultimately, at the end of the day, a lot of this is about that the right works the refs. They scream and yell a lot louder. And this is something we saw in newsrooms in the 90s. And I think we're seeing this sort of the same kind of duck and cover and inoculating yourself against right-wing blowback at these platforms. And I think that's honestly a really big part of it.
Angelo Carusone, he's the president and CEO of Media Matters. Angelo, thanks so much for doing this. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.